Good afternoon and welcome to Ask an Advocate, brought to you by the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I'm your host, Lauren Duff. Pronouns are she, her. I'm the communications manager at PCADV, and today we are going to dive into the timely topic of self-care. We all know that 2020 has been a challenging and stressful year, and with the holiday season upon us now, and pandemic concerns continuing, now more than ever, it's really important for everybody to make sure that they're remembering to take care of themselves. So joining us today to discuss self-care and answer all of your self-care questions, we have Michelle Cooper, the Technical Assistance and Education Manager, and Jessa Winas, Training and Technical Assistance Specialist at PCADV. So welcome to you both, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk self-care with us today.
Thanks, Lauren. And just so everyone knows, my pronouns are she and hers.
And mine are they and them, or their, or my name.
Awesome. So I'm really glad that you decided to have us on for Ask an Advocate. It is definitely timely. And Jessa and I have been working on creating a lot of resources for advocates throughout this year. Self-care is somewhat of a passion for both of us. We both come from program, so we definitely feel like it's important to have these conversations about self-care always, but especially this year and especially right now, talking about self-care and more specifically basic self-care. So a lot of the resources that folks find tend to be geared towards self-care plans that include bigger picture things like taking yoga classes or taking 15 minutes for breath work or meditation. And those things are awesome and absolutely a great thing to engage in whenever possible. But a lot of times we sort of gloss over the concept of basic self-care. So we wanted to talk a little bit more about what that is and how advocates can engage with that going into the holidays, winter, everything, and think about ways that they can support themselves, each other, and the survivors that we work with.
Yeah, so basic self-care is one of my favorite things to talk about. Because as Michelle said, it's one of those things that often get overlooked when we talk about self-care. The way that we've been holding these conversations, both internally at PCDV as well as with our programs with advocates, is to really reframe what self-care is, right? It's not necessarily the treat yourself to a coffee and that fixes everything, right? When we're steeped in trauma and our own lived experiences and we're being activated all the time. It's about those basic level things that you can use in your daily life, right? In order to be able to get up, get out of bed. And sometimes that's the one victory you have for the day. And saying and giving yourself permission to recognize the success in that, and that's okay and worth celebrating as well. So again, when we talk about basic self-care, what it is when we say that is exactly what it sounds like, is the most basic level things that we can be doing to take care of ourselves. And they're extremely important because, you know, they are overlooked. They're things that don't necessarily or aren't necessarily celebrated, but we definitely want folks to be able to reframe that and hold space for how important it is and how successful it is whenever you are able to change your clothing, right? At least maybe twice a week. I know some folks like wince at that, but you know what? Sometimes it takes a lot of effort. A lot of your emotional spoons go into opening your eyes and forcing yourself to maybe change your socks today, right? And that's a solid win. That's one great thing that's basic self-care that you're doing. Or put on a new shirt, right? Because I have a Zoom meeting today. I did that. I've been wearing the same shirt for the last like 3 or 4 days. I woke up and I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to put a different shirt on today. And I did. That's basic self-care. This can also include things like drinking fluids. And I'm not saying, you know, drink your 60 ounces of water every day and like get those fancy water bottles that outline the times of water. It's drink what, as Lauren drinks water. It's drink whatever fluid feels best for you. That could be tea or soda or whatever that is, any sort of fluid, just making sure that you're doing some sort of intake to maintain some form of hydration. This can also look like things like showering or bathing, right? Again, it doesn't necessarily need to be every day if that's not something you're capable of doing, but just trying to make time in your schedule to do that, to make that a task that you set up and set yourself out to do. Because again, that's something that you can check off your list and be successful while, increasing your hygiene, right? Again, this is a basic self-care tactic that we often overlook. Or it could even be things like taking your medications or vitamins. That can be hard to do. Medication management, usually one of the first things to go when you don't feel good, when you don't feel like doing anything. Same thing with napping or sleeping, like listening to your body, giving yourself that permission that, it's like 2:00, 2:30. I'm exhausted. I'm not going to push myself through whatever it is I need to do. I'm not going to force myself to sit in front of my computer if I don't have to. So giving yourself permission to get up and move, to sleep that extra 10 minutes if that's what your body needs, or if you're overwhelmed, right, to take that time for yourself. And then of course developing some sort of routine. It doesn't have to be a strict stringent routine of like down to every 15 minutes unless that works best for you. Some people work better with that. Those are just some of the methods of basic self-care that we talk about. I'm going to share 2 resources that we use pretty heavily when we talk about this. The first one I'm going to share is a printable. It's hosted through Google. I have this laminated and hung up in my office. It's called Everything is Awful and I'm Not Okay. Questions to ask before you give up. So it's also nice to laugh at, but it's very, very helpful in the moment. It covers things like, are you hydrated, right? If not, get a drink. Have you eaten, right? Doing those check-ins. Have I eaten anything in the last couple hours? Have I showered lately? Do I not feel attractive, right? Take a selfie, make yourself feel better, right? Do something, these small variations of activities. Again, they're not heavy asks. We're not saying, take a hot yoga class with goats or like things that aren't necessarily achievable in short-term moments that help you get from hour to hour. So this is a really good resource to have, and we'll be sure to share that. And it's easy to keep, again, around your office, on your desktop. Again, I have mine saved on my desktop. I have it laminated in my office. So that's a good one. And then the other one is this really awesome quiz. I don't like to say quiz, but this active check-in form. And what this does, it's an interactive flow chart. So you can use this with yourself and with survivors. And I know Michelle's going to talk more about this also, but it's super awesome to use. You can use it on your phone, on your computer. And it does exactly what we're talking about. It's forcing you to check in with yourself. Have you eaten, right? I'm always down for snacks, so I can use a snack. So it says, okay, go ahead and do that, right? Give yourself permission to do that. It doesn't tell me what to eat, doesn't define what healthy is because all bodies are different, all needs are different. Okay, I ate my snack. Did I have to take any meds? I took my meds today. Well, maybe you should drink some water. Okay. How much sleep have you gotten? I always need a nap. So it tells you to take a nap and come back. Again, it just walks you through all these different things that you can do to check in with yourself that serve as basic self-care, right? So that you're able to continue through your day and have these small successes under your belt. So this is something, like I said, we really wanted to share because it is really effective. It's really helpful. You can sit and do the entire quiz, or you can do 3 or 4 questions at a time. It's also a good way to allow yourself, to give yourself permission to check out while still doing something, right? Because we have this issue with allowing ourselves permission to do nothing, right? This is doing something, but helping yourself in the process. So we just definitely really wanted to share this because we love these resources.
Hey, Jessa, I have a quick question for you related to some of these basic self-care things. And so for people who, which is most of us, really are at a point where, we do need to check in with ourselves and make sure that we're doing these basic things, taking care of this. You mentioned even just maintaining a routine right now. If we're coming up on the holidays and having family, asking us if we're coming over, asking us what our plans are, expecting us to do things, expecting us to treat the holidays in a normal way when this is not a normal year. And maybe they're not as familiar with these basic self-care issues. How can people talk to their family members to remind them I might not be able to partake in the holidays the way that I always have because right now I just need to take care of myself and make sure that I'm, taking care of my basic self-care needs. How can we talk to family members about that might not be familiar with these concepts?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. I'm one for very hard, firm boundaries and direct communication about those boundaries. Um, I appreciate you, right? I appreciate your invitation. I love you, but we're in a pandemic. I don't feel safe coming here, right? Um, and again, like when we talk about the holidays, it can be hard because there's a lot attached to that, what family looks like, all of those things. But just directly expressing, I don't have the energy to put into this right now. Like, again, hard and firm. I'm not comfortable being there. I'm not going to be there. I love you. I still care about you. This isn't reflective of a relationship. It's just not something I can commit to right now. I'm not comfortable doing that. And not having to explain yourself in depth with that should be respected by the folks that care and love you. Michelle, I don't know if you have anything to
Absolutely.
add.
And I think I just have to add that, having those kinds of boundaries is in and of itself a form of basic self-care. And so, one of the things that we're really trying to promote here is when you are able to complete a self-care task, no matter how small, it's important to acknowledge that for yourself, for other people. So something like having that kind of a boundary can be really challenging. It's hard to have those conversations sometimes. And so it's a form of self-care, not only to have that boundary, but to then acknowledge that for yourself, because you might get pushback. You might, that might not feel good, even though it's the best thing for you. And so creating self-care plans that include preparing for, when you're taking care of yourself and other people aren't necessarily in a place to acknowledge that. Hopefully this is a year where everybody's being a little more gentle with one another, but we know that that's not always the case. And so in those instances where you have to set that boundary and you maybe don't get the result that you want, right? People are still putting pressure on you or making you feel bad, trying to make you feel bad. To put in place a way to care for yourself, whether it's checking in with a friend, having an opportunity to work through those emotions and feelings, and acknowledging and being proud of the fact that I know that what I just did was best for me and it was my form of self-care, and to build that into your self-care routine too, because that's a form of basic care for yourself, being proud of yourself for doing things that are uncomfortable.
Great, thank you very much.
So one thing that we get asked a lot is, how can we apply these things to our work with survivors? So a lot of the work that Jess and I have done this year have been in support of advocates, and we really feel like that's the first step. So when it comes to caring for survivors and, being the best that we can be, that means engaging in this kind of self-care for ourselves. Advocates sometimes have a tendency to feel like it's our responsibility to take absolutely everything on and make sure that everybody else is taken care of before we even think about caring for ourselves. It's that whole idea of that metaphor of you have to make sure that your oxygen mask is on first and that you're taken care of before you can help other people. And that really applies at a time like this. So the first and best thing that we can all do to support each other and the survivors that we work with is to make sure that we're engaging in this basic self-care and doing things like demonstrating the importance of setting boundaries, of acknowledging ourselves for doing the smaller things. And then also remembering to do that with survivors. So a lot of times in our work, and this is once again not a bad thing, but we tend to really promote the big picture stuff. So when it comes to self-care with survivors, when we're working with them, we may really encourage them to do those bigger things, keep a journal, go to a class, do those bigger picture forms of self-care. We don't always acknowledge the basic stuff. And right now, more than ever, it's really important to acknowledge all of the things, not just the big stuff. So just like we encourage folks to acknowledge their own ability to have a glass of water, or to, give yourself a pat on the back because I remembered to take my vitamins today. We need to do the same thing with the survivors that we work with, our friends, our family. Like now more than ever is a time to support folks where they are and for doing even the smallest things, because that acknowledgement means a lot more than we often think it does. And we know that during a time like this, we're all struggling. Whatever trauma we bring to the table, whatever we've been through, gets exacerbated in a crisis and gets exacerbated during the holidays. So right now is sort of that perfect storm of where everybody's sort of ready for people to tell them they're not doing enough or to put that on themselves. I don't even want to get out of bed today. And as friends, as caseworkers, as advocates, we can do a lot of good by just saying, hey, you got out of bed today, and that is awesome. I watched you drink an extra glass of water, and I just want to say that is such a great idea. I'm actually going to do that too. Thank you so much for helping me remember to take care of myself, and making that acknowledgement a part of your plan and your work. We're framing this around advocates and survivors, but honestly, this is just best practice for how to get through life right now. And we encourage everyone to just be kind to yourself and to each other.
Great. I think those are some great reminders. And I think we also have, correct me if I'm wrong, we have a webinar available for advocates that's about advocate healthcare. So if anybody is interested in that, you can reach out to PCADV through our Facebook page, and we can connect you with that access to that webinar if you want to get a little bit more in depth with this as well.
Great. So we have one more thing to share, unless there's any questions, of course.
I think we can go to the COVID principles. Yeah.
All right. Woo, COVID principles. All right.
So this is something, and credit where credit's due, this was something that was shared with us early this year at the beginning of the pandemic. We do not know who to give credit to because it's been shared and shared. So if anyone out there knows who created these principles, we would love to be able to get in touch with them to offer our gratitude. But this is something that we've been using throughout the year to just remind folks a little bit of how to take care of yourself during these interesting and challenging times.
All right. So the first one is that you are not working from home. Or no, wait, this is Michelle. This is you. Just kidding. I jumped ahead. I got too excited about COVID principles.
That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing that we like to talk about is the fact that you're not working from home. You're at home during a crisis trying to work. Now, we realize that not everyone works remotely. We realize that not everybody has the luxury and privilege of being able to work from home. So for those who are, it can sometimes feel like, oh, I'm working from home, but I have to do all of this extra work so that I can prove that I'm still doing my job the way that I'm supposed to. For those who don't have the privilege of remote work, they're expected to just show up every day and do things as if there weren't a crisis happening right now. So the first principle that we like to remind everyone about is just to remember that no matter what your work situation is right now, whether you're at home, whether you're working, whatever you're doing, that this is a time of crisis. This is a time where normal doesn't exist. And we can often put pressure on ourselves in this way to think that I have to maintain as though things were the way that they used to be, and they're not. So a form of basic self-care is to just acknowledge the fact that things are not normal right now, that they're very challenging, that they're very stressful, and to take that pressure off for trying to feel like you have to maintain the status quo.
Yeah, and I know, just to jump in really quick, out of turn, sorry, but I know that also for a lot of the advocates, they've had to adapt the way that they do a lot of things to still provide services and still do their jobs during the pandemic. And so I think, the added stress of having to learn new ways to do your work and adapt to all of this too, people should recognize that they're not just like still being expected to do their job in a crisis, but in many ways they're expected to learn completely new things and do things in new ways and still get all of that work done in the middle of a crisis. So I just, acknowledging that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So the second principle is that your personal, physical, mental, and emotional health is far more important than anything else right now. Again, going back to basic self-care, any day that you're not actively spiraling is something to celebrate, right? Because again, we're in a pandemic. We just finished up an intense election season. We're entering into holiday season. That means different things for everyone, right? We're also entering into like 8 months of pandemic lockdown, ready for wave 2. So it's bringing up a lot. We're experiencing a collective trauma is what's happening now, right? So we already have our own traumas, that we have our own lived experiences, right? If we're as DV advocates, we're now involved in the secondary trauma of our work, right? Being steeped in trauma all the time. And then there's also now the trauma and the impact of this collective trauma that we're witnessing through COVID-19. So there's a lot of layers there, right? All the trauma. So it's really important to attend to your personal, your physical, your mental and emotional health. And all of that starts with basic self-care.
Great. So next, once again, thinking about work or family or whatever you're engaging in during this time, you should not try to compensate for lost productivity by working longer hours. This is especially challenging, during a crisis, because as I mentioned before, we DV advocates tend to really like to take all of the responsibility on our shoulders. And now more than ever, it can be really tempting to feel like, I need to work, an extra shift. I need to be on all the time, because exactly what Jessa said, trauma upon trauma upon trauma is happening. And we are here to help you work through that trauma and to support you and to do everything that we can to make sure that you're feeling safe and comfortable. And so times like this can really exacerbate our feeling like if we're not doing and going above and beyond, we're not doing our job, or we're not doing our job well. And so it's really very crucial, and another form of that basic self-care, to pace yourself. My favorite thing to remind myself during a time like this is that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And that means that it's important to be thinking long-term and pacing yourself and saving your energy, and certainly not getting stuck in this feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm not as productive as I normally am because my whole routine has shifted. My workspace is different. The way that I engage with people is different. I'm doing Zoom meetings now, so I have to overcompensate because my trainings or my case management sessions are shorter than they might normally be. It's really important to remember that what you're able to do now is enough, and to not feel like you have to overcompensate by working well into the evening hours or into the morning, or to adjust your schedule in some way to compensate for the changes that you have to make to manage a crisis.
Yes. And just adding on a little bit to what Michelle is saying, that this is something that pre-COVID we worked really heavily with our programs on, is that we, especially in the DV movement, have really glorified the idea of overwork. Right? Oh, you're clocking out at 4 o'clock when your day's supposed to be over. You really don't care about survivors as much as I do, because I'm willing to stay until 6 o'clock. Right? And that's something that we've been trying to undo before this, right? But especially now, it's important that we set those basic routines, right? Those healthy boundaries around those works. And again, upholding that doesn't mean you don't care, that you're not serious about the work, that you're not a real advocate, right? It's just showing that you value yourself and you're able to take care of yourself while still being an effective advocate.
Absolutely.
Ooh, I took them all away. Okay. The next principle is that you'll be kind to yourself and not judge how you're coping based on how you see others coping, right? This is really hard given the fact that we're all inside. The only like interactions we get are on social media, and we're doom scrolling all the time and seeing people that love being in quarantine, that are flourishing and doing all these super cool things. There's a lot of conversations around weight gain, which again can be activating. So it's important to recognize how you're doing this, right? What you're exposing yourself to, especially on social media, because it can be activating for folks that have large, soft bodies to see people that are doing the before and after. Here's my March picture. Here's my November picture. What have you been doing in quarantine, right? Or like the quarantine 15 conversation. That's body shaming, right? That's internalization of things, of like being anti-fat culture. Or again, comparing what your experience is with what you're seeing other families doing. It's really important, again, not to compare what you are doing to maintain your own self and what your basic self-care looks like to what others are doing. So that's really important, a very important thing to do. Please stop doom scrolling.
Please. Now more than ever, just get off Twitter. The flip side to that is that you'll be kind to others and not judge how they're coping based on how you're coping. So these two go hand in hand, right? As much as it's important for us to not get brought down by seeing other people and the way that they're managing during a crisis, it's also really important to not, cope by judging other people harshly for how they're getting by. It's just like we said at the beginning of this discussion, now more than ever is a time to be kind to ourselves and kind to other people. And with social media, with social media where everybody's really bored and don't have any other outlets, now we have these windows into each other's lives that we never had before. People are sharing more, people are on social media more, as if we thought that was even possible before 2020. So now we're able to see, how other people are coping. Some people are coping with a lot of gallows humor. And for some people that's awesome. For some people that can really activate you and it can make you feel upset. And it's important to take everything that you see on social media with that grain of kindness to say, you know what, that's somebody else's coping mechanism. I don't agree with it, but I'm not going to get caught up in a spiral of passing judgment or being cruel or shaming them for how they're doing it. If worse comes to worse, I'm going to block them or put them on mute, or I'm not going to look at that particular website or page, but I'm not going to engage in shaming other people for how they're getting through a crisis situation, because that's what it is, a crisis situation, and everyone's going to have their own way of getting through.
Then the last principle is your team's success will not be judged the same way it was when things were normal, right? And the biggest word in this sentence is normal. What even is normal on a good day, right? But this really speaks a lot to we're never going back to how things were in February of 2020, right? Pre-COVID, pre-quarantine, before we even really were talking about what this looks like, social distancing, mask wearing, all of those things. We're never going back to that. The expectations are never going to be the same as that. So what's important to know is that, again, your success or the way that your day looks, right? The way you interact with yourself, with clients, with your work and engage is never going to be the same as that. So we can't keep saying when things go back to normal, right? January 1 of 2021, this is all done. No, this is now the new normal. This is now what your day looks like. So it's important to do the best that you can in the circumstances that we're given, and to not compare the two, because it's apples and oranges, right? We're not going to end and go back. This is now how we're going to move forward. And again, this is the new version of what reality is. So it's really important to stay grounded in that and to, do your best, right? To not compare backwards like that, to not think in that way. because it's just harmful, because it's going to put more pressure on you. It's going to make you feel like you're losing productivity and need to do all of these like toxic behaviors that lead to self-neglect with your self-care routine. So that it's really important to understand that where we are now every day is becoming your new normal, right? Again, whatever that actually means.
Right. And when we say team, you know, that can mean your team at work, that can mean your family, that can mean your support network of friends and family. So remember that whatever your team is, whoever your people are, that structure and dynamic is going to change. And you know, it's going to keep changing. So we're not going back to the way things were, but we're certainly not going to be staying here either. Things will evolve, things will change, we will adapt. And the most important take home point for this is to just stop as much as possible comparing yourself and the way that your team interacts with the way things used to be, and start, you know, giving yourself that pat on the back for, you know, for those of you who have been dealing with virtual school. It can be really difficult. You know, you might feel like, man, I'm not doing things the same way that I did. I don't know if I'm parenting in the same way. I don't know if my kids are getting the right kind of education. And the honest truth is that no one really knows what they're doing right now. We're all winging it. And we need to remember to give ourselves credit for our ability to wing it. And as we get to the end of this year, really take a minute to just respect that we've gotten through this year, that we've made it to the end of 2020, we've made it to this holiday season, and every little thing is a win. So that's sort of why Jessa and I wanted to come today and talk about this, you know, basic self-care, all the other big stuff aside. Everyone give yourself a gold star for getting here, for being here at the end of this year. Take the silver linings, enjoy where you can. And we hope that, you know, these principles and this information is helpful for you.
Thank you so much for giving, you know, this perspective. And that last COVID principle I find is such a strange thing to wrap your mind around, but it is important to remind ourselves that we, you know, we've adapted thus far and we should feel good about that, however we've had to do it, in whatever way has worked for us, and continuing to adapt to that and realize that there's no, you know, like you said, quote unquote, going back to this whatever normal means, because whatever it meant for you before, it's going to be different now. And while that's difficult to wrap your head around, it's an important perspective to maintain, I think. And I also appreciate the message that you both have repeated today about just the need for us to be kind to each other. And we're just about out of time, so I just kind of wanted to end on that. And as a reminder, you know, happy holidays in whatever way you celebrate this winter season, and be kind to each other, everybody. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.